jumping in to storylines. I'm going to try and go through this pretty quickly, but there are kind of 5 things I'm looking at here that I feel like are going to really go a long way toward defining this season. First one, which teams bounce back? Portland and Seattle both missed the playoffs. That doesn't happen. New England Revolution went from being the best regular season team in the history of the league to 10th in the Eastern Conference. Colorado and Sporting Kansas City were right there at the top of the Western Conference in 2021. Nowhere to be found in 2022. And what does Toronto do? There are just all of these teams, specifically Portland, Seattle, Toronto, Kansas City, that you associate as being some of the most successful, most consistent in the league, that all had bad MLS regular seasons last year. Do all of them bounce back? If so, to what degree? Is it, the Sounders and Timbers making the playoffs again, or is it Kansas City and Seattle going toe-to-toe for the number 1 seed in the West in the Supporters' Shield? What does this thing look like for Toronto? Can Colorado recapture their magic and play better defense? Can Kansas City stay healthy? All of that. It's a very interesting situation heading into the season, because if you're just sort of picking off the top of your head without paying attention to, last season, to rosters, just in terms of teams you would pick and expect to have success, right? You're picking the Timbers, you're picking the Sounders, you're picking Toronto, you're picking Sporting Kansas City, and all of them missed the playoffs last season. Number 2, kind of on the flip side of that, who takes the next step? I'm looking at 4 particular teams here, and 2 specifically inside that group of 4. FC Cincinnati. Last season, massive success. Couldn't have gone much better. Got to the playoffs, figured out how you want to do this, what you want to be, how to translate that into success on the field. You got the hardest part of the sport down, which is scoring goals. And you also addressed the defensive issue and made progress in that area. It is all there for Cincinnati. There's a reason I have them too, and I am in the majority, I would argue, on that. This is about getting to a conference final now. This is about contending for an MLS Cup. This team is too good at this point to just be happy with making the playoffs again. It's the biggest compliment I can give them. And then the other team is the LA Galaxy. I kind of hinted at this earlier as well. You've got the stars. You had some success at the end of last season. You got back into the playoffs. The vibes are better. Greg Vanney seems to finally be getting this thing going in the right direction and kind of overcoming a lot of the things that just came with being the Galaxy in recent years. Got to deliver. Similar to Cincinnati, right? Making the playoffs again is not good enough. At some point, this has to end, and the Galaxy have to get back to being one of the best teams in the league. And it's there on paper. And you've got the global star in Ricky Puig that should get you there. Do they actually take that step? And then the other 2, I'll mention briefly, FC Dallas and Inter Miami. FC Dallas, you add a striker to a really good attacking trio. They were excellent last season. Can you go from more, go to that next level of, again, not just being happy to be in the playoffs, not just winning a playoff game, but really being built to get into those later rounds and compete for a conference championship. And Inter Miami, I'm just curious about two MLS MVPs on the roster. What does this look like? Again, you made the playoffs. They looked better last season. It's clearly headed in the right direction. What is the ceiling? How far can you get? Can you get to be anything other than 5th, 6th, 7th best team in the conference? So that is what I'm looking at there. Next is, to me, the most interesting storyline, the one I am most excited for this season. Which designated players deliver? I'm just going to run through some of the ones I'm thinking about. Evander is supposed to be the best player on the Portland Timbers. They spent big time money to bring him in. It looks great on paper. It makes all the sense in the world. Does he actually become one of the best players in the league immediately? Talked about Dante Van Zer with the New York Red Bulls. He might be the single most important. Maybe Evander becomes that guy. But in terms of raising a team's ceiling, Van Zer might be the single most important player that was brought in this offseason in the league. Because if he starts scoring 15, 20 goals, it changes everything for the Red Bulls. Georgios Giacomakis in Atlanta, replacing the greatest player in the history of the, albeit a short history, but history of the franchise. Again, great track record, big time pedigree. Can he get Atlanta back into the postseason and looking like one of the best teams in the league again after a really tough stretch here? Toronto guys. Yes, they were here at the end of last season, but they get a fresh start. There is an immense amount of pressure on this team. There has been way too much money spent, way too many roster rebuilds for this not to work. It has to work. And then the other thing I'll throw out there. New England Revolution made a designated player switch and really kind of overhauled things last season. Adam Buska out, Matt Turner out, Jordy Pekovic, and your designated players in. That's still an awfully gifted attack with two really good outside backs. They don't have the, and you can make a case the best goalkeeper in the league. Certainly the second best, if not the best. That's a team that should easily make the playoffs. But it's predicated on, can you get the new guys who were kind of working their way into things last season integrated with Carles Hill and that back line. Because it looks good on paper. And it did not work at all last season. Again, it was early, trying to get everybody acclimated to the league, because that's the other part of this DP thing. It's not just, are these players as good as they're supposed to be? It's which ones are able to figure it out immediately. Because sometimes it's a bizarre league with travel that most of these players have never experienced before, because you don't see it about anywhere else in the world. It's a whole different world to get used to. Sometimes it just takes a while. And this is also the reason why Atlanta United wasn't on my list in the East. Sorry, not Atlanta, Nashville. Ake Lobo was supposed to be the guy. It just didn't work. And they need somebody to help Hani Mukhtar. Those two guys are kind of the two different directions DPs can go, right? Mukhtar's been phenomenal. He's the best player in the league. Everything Nashville could have asked for and then some. But they tried to go get the second guy to help him, and it didn't work. And so when we look at the end of the season and where these standings are and which teams are, home field advantage, top 4 seeds, which teams are in the Supporter Shield race, this is the big question I think we're going to be looking at. Because maybe Evander is phenomenal and the Timbers are right back near the top of the West. Maybe Insigne and Bernadeschi just can't find a way to make it work. I mean, I'm just throwing out examples. But all those guys I listed, all of those teams, those players who have limited or no experience in this league are being asked to carry a crucial load for teams with expectations that are used to winning at a high level or have in the recent past. Which of these signings work? I am fascinated by that question. And how does kind of the transition from all these guys who came in the summer going into a full season pan out as well? All of that I am fascinated by. Number 4 here, has the gap widened in the West? I sort of talked about this earlier. I'm not going to go too much deeper on it. Montreal lost key players and their coach from the team that was the closest to challenging the Union in the East. Meanwhile, LAFC sold their striker without a like-for-like replacement. Austin and Dallas added good ones. The LA Galaxy have a full season of Ricky Pooch. João Paulo is back for the Sounders. Hopefully, Sports of Kansas City gets healthy and they look really good on paper. This is what I was talking about with LAFC. I just don't think the margin last year was significant, and I just don't see it being that way this season. Maybe I'm wrong on this, but to me, it's a much more interesting question in the West than it is the East, because there's something has to be proven for somebody to hang with the Union. That could be as simple as, yeah, Cincinnati really are as good defensively as they looked at the end of last season. But that's also a team that just were happy to make the playoffs last season. Asking them to go win a conference is a big step. Whereas in the West, you're looking at, okay, second best team in the conference last season, the team nobody ever wants to deal with because they just know how to win better than anybody else. A Sporting Kansas City team that always seems to be at the top of the conference and find a way to bounce back when they're not. FC Dallas was good last season. You can go down and the Galaxy are there as well. You can go down the list of, I just feel very much more confident about kind of the hierarchy of the East. And specifically when it comes to the Union and LAFC, because they were just so clearly the best two teams last season. To me, the Union have a much bigger gap to work with than LAFC do. Certainly they can win it again. I just think it's going to be much more difficult this time around. And then, finally, the last thing is the CONCACAF Champions League and Leagues Cup impact. How does this all influence the MLS regular season? The roster rules in MLS are not built to allow teams sorry about that. Not built to allow teams to have the depth needed to navigate a season like this one that you've never seen in MLS before. With the regular season like normal, with the Open Cup like normal, with the Champions League like normal, and the Leagues Cup now everybody participating in it. It's also not an entire coincidence that Union and LAFC didn't play in the CONCACAF Champions League last year. They're both playing in it this season. How does that factor into what seem to be the best two teams in the league on paper, arguably? Or at least your conference favorites. That's the better way to put it. Does somebody figure out how to manage this better than others? How do teams handle this? And do we see, because there are plenty of examples, I went back and looked, of teams that played in the CONCACAF Champions League who then made MLS Cup. It's not like the Sounders were the most recent example of this long-time trend. But if you make a deep run in the CONCACAF Champions League, like LAFC and the Union are capable of, what does that do for the MLS regular season? What does that do to your Supporters Shield hopes? Can you navigate everything? So that is the last thing I'm looking at. And then, of course, it wouldn't be an MLS conversation if we don't talk about the new playoff format. I saw, as I was reading a couple hours ago, Jim Curtin is a fan of this best of three thing because it creates the familiarity and the tension, which is valid, right? When you see a team 3 times in the span of a week or whatever it's going to be. Do I really care if 8 teams make it or 9? No. Do I like the best of 3 series in that first round? No. It's a money grab. There's no other reason to it. We just got to accept it for what it is. And I get the money part of it, that you gotta work with Apple on this. And if Apple's going to spend that much money on the league, Apple wants certain things in return. And that broadcast deal has always been an issue for MLS. Some sacrifices have to be made on that. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I want to hit on one point here. And really, it's kind of 2 points melded into one. My biggest issue with this is that I want MLS to stop trying to be multiple things. Is the postseason a single elimination knockout tournament, or is it a playoff like other sports in this country? Instead of, well, it's a single elimination tournament, except there's a best of 3 series at the beginning. But then once we get down to 8 teams, it's a single elimination tournament. I want one or the other. And really, I just want the single elimination tournament. Because it's a cup. But now all of a sudden you have taken a different... Cup competitions are single elimination knockout. And MLS Cup is no longer that. That will always irk me. And so the question then becomes, okay, what is the alternative if, because I get why this is happening, and if it's the price that you have to pay to make this work with Apple, I'm fine with it. And I also understand this is just, the games are going to be a sticking point. And so the way to solve the problems that I see right now, I don't think removing the extra games that were added, is the practical solution. I've given up on that hope. There are going to be more games coming. So here's the other part of this that I want to end on. And the other part of be one thing or the other. There's a regular season trophy in this league. And, right, so going from 8 devalued the regular season enough already. Now it's 62% of the teams are getting in. Yes, it just devalues the regular season further. And like I said, the games are not a practical way to address that issue by putting more value on every single one of them. So what can you do? How about we reframe the way, and especially with the playoff change and Leagues Cup now taking this form, how about we reframe the conversation about the trophies in this league? Why is it that the Supporters' Shield is treated as the secondary kind of cherry on top? And I don't necessarily direct that at MLS, because obviously it comes with home field advantage in the playoffs. It's a huge deal. But just generally, the collective MLS community. Why is this any different than the setup in England, for example? Why can't MLS Cup be the equivalent of the Champions League? You qualify with your regular season performance. All you want is the opportunity, right? And then you just see what happens because it's a single elimination knockout tournament and everybody understands that. Nobody sits there saying the team that won the Champions League is the best team in Europe. They're just the champions of Europe. Real Madrid were not the best team last season. Tottenham made it. Chelsea won it in a year where they were bad. Weird things happen. That's the beauty of a knockout tournament. You're not finding the best team. So then treat the Supporters' Shield like a league title. Instead of making it the secondary thing. Make the Leagues Cup the FA Cup, the Open Cup the Carabao Cup, however you want to prioritize them. But look at this as 4 trophies that should be taken incredibly seriously. Because some teams just throw the Open Cup away, and it's getting better in that sense. And I've always been irked by that as well. But have the get to a point where we're having a conversation. I don't understand why it isn't already this way. Except for this country's obsession with postseasons, which it's one of the things I love about soccer. The best team actually gets the trophy sometimes. It's great. You don't have to go try and rewrite history based on, for example, the NCAA tournament, 4 weeks or whatever it is. It's just different, and we don't treat it different. So let's have some fun conversations. Would you rather win an MLS Cup or a Supporters Shield? Because right now, I'm one of the only people in the world who thinks that's a real conversation, I feel like. If you are, let's just say, okay, FC Cincinnati. Would you rather qualify for the CONCACAF Champions League or win the Open Cup? Would you would you take a Leagues Cup if it meant not making the MLS playoffs? It's the same thing with Newcastle this weekend. Newcastle fans, I think by and large, would happily forego the Champions League to hoist a trophy. But there's this, at least I feel like, as somebody who follows this league closely, and I don't think this is a hot take at all, there's this emphasis on the MLS Cup part of this because that's the champion. And teams like the 2021 New England Revolution, who, again, best regular season team in the history of this league, don't even get talked about. They have a trophy to show for it. But everything is catered to the postseason, which is a real problem for me when you continue to devalue the regular season. Because it's just, and the Sounders have made a living off of this, right? Let's just get there. Because nobody remembers what happens or how we got there. As long as we show up and we know how to take care of business in a knockout format, which, by the way, takes a different set of skills and a different style of play than being consistent over a 34-game, 38-game season. Another reason why these two should be equal, because they're different. This has just always irked me, and I got thinking about it again. Now that you have 4 competitions, don't just treat everything else as completely secondary to MLS Cup. Now, some people, right, it's the conversation you were having with, the other example, right, the Liverpool thing. Would you rather have another Champions League or would you rather win a Premier League? Oh, rather win a Premier League. We've done the Champions League thing, right? That's why that Premier League carried so much weight. There was a history to it. New York City, for example, okay, have an MLS Cup. Haven't won a Supporters Shield. How many New York City fans would rather win the Supporters Shield this season than another MLS Cup? There has to be value. Right? Again, going back to the be one thing or the other. Soccer is built on regular seasons with single elimination cup competitions thrown in. It's a beautiful blend where you can separate the two ideas. It's the only sport that does this. Everything else is so narrowly focused. I love that about this sport. And the one place you don't see it is Major League Soccer. And there's an opportunity here to change that. It's not going to change overnight, I get that. But can, collectively, we start changing the narrative here a little bit and not put so much value on a single elimination or kind of, knockout tournament thing that is the MLS playoffs? Can we give the New England Revolution their due when they roll through the regular season? Does it have to be a complete failure if they don't lift a trophy? Right? We never do. Europe, you talk about it all the time. Can they salvage their season with a trophy? Newcastle's season is made. It doesn't matter if they throw the Champions League away. If they get the Carabao Cup, season's a success. Why can't that be the same way here? Why is the Supporters Shield in this really weird place where it kind of is a trophy and kind of not? I would love to see it be treated on the same level as MLS Cup, quite frankly. In my mind, that's what it is. And I'm pretty sure I'm in the minority on that. Feel free to let me know in the comments if you are either with me or think that I'm off on any of this. But that's the other thing I wanted to throw about this new playoff format. It's all different this season. This is a chance to kind of reevaluate the value that is placed on all of these. I'm not saying the Supporters Shield has to take over MLS Cup. I get the playoffs. It's thrilling. It's amazing. But why can't they both work together to give you two different, equal things? It's like you get a Champions League and you don't even have to wait till the next season. You qualify and then you get to play it. How awesome is that? I would love for MLS to get to a point where that is the case.